My name is Clara Hastings. And if there's one thing I've learned about betrayal, it's that it never arrives wearing horns. It comes smiling, holding a cup of coffee, asking how you've been. For most of my life, I believed my older sister, Marianne, was my other half. We were the kind of siblings people envied, two blonde girls with the same green eyes, the same laugh, the same promise that we'd never hurt each other. She was 3 years older, but we grew up like twins, sleeping in the same room until she left for college. I was 17 then, still clinging to her shadow, still thinking her absence was temporary. Marianne became a corporate lawyer in Chicago. All power suits and perfect hair. I stayed home in Vermont, helping our parents run a small antique store while I worked toward my art degree. I painted the same mountain that hung behind our house, the one Dad used to call the sleeping giant. I didn't know it then, but that mountain would become the silent witness to everything that destroyed us. When Dad got sick, Marianne didn't come home right away. She said work was impossible to leave. Mom and I took shifts at the hospital, watching the strongest man we knew shrink into a whisper. I remember one night, sitting by his bed, sketching his hands. He woke up just long enough to say, "You always see what others don't. Clara, don't let them tell you what's real." I didn't understand it then. After he passed, everything changed. The will named Mom as sole executor. But there was a trust fund, one that Dad had set up for me when I was born. It was supposed to be for my art studio, the dream he and I had always shared. He'd even left me the deed to a small cottage on our family land, the one near the creek. But when the lawyer read the will, my name wasn't there. The trust had been dissolved. Every cent, every memory was redirected to Marianne for family management. I remember the sound of the pen dropping from my hand. Mom's eyes wouldn't meet mine. Marianne placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "We'll talk later." Okay. Later never came. For weeks. I called lawyers, banks, anyone who could explain what had happened. Each one told me the same thing: my father had amended the documents 6 months before he died. His signature was there, clean and legal. But I'd seen Dad's handwriting in those last months shaky, uneven, weak. That signature looked forged. When I confronted Marianne, she didn't even flinch. He wanted me to handle things responsibly. She said, "You're emotional, Clara. You'd waste it all chasing some art fantasy." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My father's dream, our dream, was now her property. That night, I packed a bag and left the house. I couldn't bear to look at Mom, who had clearly known. Betrayal is cruelest when it comes from those who raised you. I rented a small apartment in Burlington, started teaching art therapy classes to kids with trauma. I painted when I could afford it, mostly in the quiet hours when the world felt far away. But even then, my sister's voice haunted me. "You're emotional, Clara. You'd waste it." For years, I lived like that, half invisible, half alive. Then, one rainy evening, a stranger walked into my class. His name was Elliot Price, a journalist writing a feature on unconventional recovery programs. He stayed after the session, asked me questions about my work, my childhood, my art. He had kind eyes, the kind that see more than you're willing to show. Over the next few months, Elliot became my quiet anchor. We didn't talk about Marianne. I told him only that I'd lost my father and that family had become complicated. He didn't pry. He just listened. And in the silences, I started to breathe again. Then, one afternoon, while we were cleaning up after a workshop, Elliot mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "I interviewed a corporate lawyer last month," he said casually. "Name's Marianne Hastings. Sharp woman. She was talking about an art investment project. Said her sister was the creative inspiration behind it." I froze. What did she say exactly? He frowned, sensing the tension. Something about honoring her late father's legacy through artistic community spaces. She's launching it this fall in New York. My chest tightened. That was my dream. My father's studio. The same idea he and I had mapped out years ago, the community art space for local kids. She'd stolen not only my inheritance, but my very identity. That night, I looked her up online. There she was, glowing on the homepage of a glossy magazine, Marianne Hastings, founder of the Hastings Art Foundation. A photo of her standing in front of a huge mural, a replica of one of my early paintings. I stared at it until my eyes burned. My name wasn't anywhere, but my brushstrokes were. I clicked through the gallery page. Every piece showcased in her foundation was something I'd created before leaving home. Old sketches. Stolen canvases I'd thought were lost in storage. She'd taken them, reproduced them, and built an empire on the ashes of what she'd stolen from me. I should have cried. I didn't. I just felt the familiar cold settle in the one that came right before clarity. The next morning, I called Elliot. You still have connections at that magazine? Yeah. Why? I want you to help me write a story. I said, but not for publication. Not yet. Over the next 3 months, we worked in secret. I gathered proof, every old photo, every painting, every note my father had written about the studio. I found one letter in particular, buried in an old sketchbook, dated just 2 weeks before his death. Marianne worries about money. Clara worries about meaning. If only they could learn from each other, they'd be unstoppable. At the bottom, in his fading handwriting, were 6 words that changed everything. The cottage and trust remain hers. It was signed shaky, uneven, real. Elliot leaned over my shoulder as I showed him. That's your father's true signature, isn't it? Yes, I whispered. And the one on the will isn't. We brought it to a handwriting analyst, who confirmed what I already knew: the legal amendment was a forgery. My sister had falsified Dad's final documents. Elliot looked at me carefully. What are you going to do with this? I smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. I'm going to let her destroy herself. Because revenge, I'd learned, isn't about doing the damage. It's about showing people the mirror and watching them crumble at their own reflection. So I planned quietly. I collected, documented, timed every step. Marianne's grand gala for the Hastings Art Foundation was in 6 months. And that night, in a room full of donors, critics, and investors, I'd give her the one thing she'd never been able to handle: the truth. 6 months sounds like a long time when you're planning revenge. But in reality, it'd pass like a shadow, quiet, deliberate, gathering weight with every heartbeat. Every sunrise brought me closer to the moment I'd stop being the girl who was erased and become the woman who rewrote the ending. I knew I couldn't just expose Marianne. She was too careful, too socially polished. Her world thrived on appearances. I had to make the collapse come from inside, from the people whose approval she worshipped. Elliot helped me strategize. He wasn't a vengeful man by nature, but he understood justice when he saw it starved. If she's forged legal documents, he said one night over coffee, you don't just have a story, you have a scandal waiting to detonate. But I don't want to destroy her name, I murmured, staring at the steam curling from my cup. I want to reclaim mine. He nodded. Then we tell the truth. But we let her confess without realizing she's doing it. By the time winter turned the Vermont hills white, I'd gathered everything: copies of my father's letters, certified handwriting analyses, and a private investigator's report showing the timeline of the forged documents. But what mattered most was what couldn't be printed on paper: the art itself. I found every one of my old paintings that she'd stolen. Some were hanging in galleries under her foundation's name. Others were sitting in climate-controlled storage. I contacted an art authenticator through Elliot's connections, who confirmed they were all originally signed by me, but the signatures had been lightly sanded and painted over. The discovery hit me like a punch. I remembered those nights painting in the cottage with Dad beside me, his voice humming low, saying, "You're painting light into dark places. Clara." Now that light had been sold, stolen, rebranded. I decided to buy one of my own paintings under a pseudonym. It cost me nearly everything in my savings. But it was worth it. When the crate arrived, I opened it alone. The smell of turpentine and linseed oil hit me, familiar as heartbreak. Beneath the surface layer of varnish, I could still see the faint outline of my original signature half buried, like a ghost trying to breathe. That was the moment I knew exactly what to do. Marianne's gala was set for May 12, the anniversary of Dad's death, a calculated cruelty disguised as tribute. The event would be held at the new Hastings Art Center in New York, a glass palace built from donations and deceit. She sent me an invitation, embossed in gold, for family. The irony was almost too rich to taste. Elliot and I drove down the night before. The city glittered like a promise and a threat all at once. I barely slept. I lay awake in the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing my father's voice over and over. Don't let them tell you what's real. By morning, I felt calm, almost eerily so. I wore a simple black dress and a silver necklace that used to belong to my mother. No makeup beyond a touch of red lipstick, the kind of color that says I'm not here to blend in anymore. When we arrived at the gala, everything smelled of money and flattery. The walls shimmered with the paintings Marianne had curated. Critics whispered words like visionary and modern renaissance. And there she was, radiant in white satin, smiling like she'd never told a lie in her life. She saw me across the room, and for a second, her mask flickered. Then she smiled wider, the kind of smile that tightens like a rope. "Clara," she exclaimed, arms outstretched. "You came." I let her hug me, her perfume sharp and expensive. "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." She didn't notice Elliot blending into the crowd, already setting up the discreet live feed we'd arranged. My goal wasn't humiliation, it was exposure. The kind that can't be undone once light hits it. The gala began with her speech. She stood under a spotlight, radiating self-importance. "Tonight, we honor my father's vision, a dream that became reality through hard work, family, and love." I felt my jaw clench. Family. She said it like it was a possession, not a connection. As she talked, images of her foundation pieces projected behind her one after another. And there it was, the sleeping giant, my most personal painting, the one I'd made for Dad when he was dying. She'd renamed it Legacy. I stepped forward. My heels echoed against the marble floor. The microphone she was using squealed as I reached the stage. "Beautiful speech," I said softly, and the room turned to look at me. Marianne's smile faltered. "Clara," she began. "This isn't really. It's okay," I said, taking the mic gently from her hand. "I just wanted to share something." The crowd shifted uneasily. Curious. The PR manager whispered something into a headset. I ignored them. I looked up at Legacy glowing on the screen. "You know," I said, voice calm, "when I painted this, I never imagined it would end up here, under someone else's name." Gasps rippled through the audience. Marianne froze. I turned toward her. "Do you remember the night Dad told us? The mountain looked like it was sleeping, that it would wake up if someone tried to steal from it." "Clara," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I said, louder now. "Because tonight, everyone deserves to know what you did, not just to me, but to him." Behind me, Elliot projected the image of Dad's handwritten letter, the one that said, "The cottage and trust remain hers." Then another slide, the forensic report proving the will amendment was forged. Then a video clip Elliot's investigative piece, pre-recorded quietly explaining the theft of my artwork, the falsified signatures, the truth of the Hastings Foundation. The crowd went silent. No one moved. Marianne's voice broke. You can't prove any of this. I turned to her, stepping closer. I already have. Security tried to shut off the projector, but Elliot had locked it remotely. The presentation looped. People began whispering. Journalists snapping photos. Phones recording. Marianne's perfect poise cracked. She backed away from the light like it burned. You don't understand, she stammered. I did it for both of us. Dad wanted. No, I said quietly. Dad wanted truth. And you buried it. For a moment, her face collapsed into something unrecognizable fear. Shame. The realization that every mask she'd worn had finally fused to her skin. I stepped down from the stage. Cameras followed me. I didn't look back. Outside, the city roared like a heartbeat. Elliot caught up to me on the steps. You did it, he said softly. No, I said. I just stopped pretending she hadn't. By morning, every major outlet had picked up the story, Hastings Foundation under investigation for fraud and forgery. The photos were everywhere. Marianne standing beside my paintings. My father's letter projected behind her. Her sponsors pulled out. Her license was suspended pending inquiry. She called me once, sobbing, begging for a private meeting. I didn't answer. Instead, I drove back to Vermont. The cottage near the creek was still there, untouched. Waiting, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Dust danced in the sunlight, painting the air gold. I placed the sleeping giant, the original, on the wall where it belonged. Then I sat by the window and whispered, It's awake now. Dad. I stayed in the cottage for days after the gala, as if silence itself were medicine. The air smelled of rain and old wood. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in my own life. The walls still remembered laughter from years ago, Dad's humming. The sound of paintbrushes tapping against jars. The gentle murmur of dreams that used to feel reachable. On the third morning, I woke before dawn. The fog had rolled in from the creek, curling through the grass like something alive. I walked outside barefoot, feeling the cold bite of dew, and stared at the mountain Dad called the sleeping giant. It wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was me. I'd been asleep for too long, muted. Irascid. Obedient. And now I'd opened my eyes. When the sun rose, the world didn't look softer. It looked honest. My phone buzzed with messages I hadn't opened in days. Journalists. Former colleagues of Marianne. Even Mom. I ignored them all until one message stood out. It was from Elliot. You should see the morning headlines. The foundation's under full audit. The art board's cutting all ties. I know it's a lot, but it's over. Clara. I typed back only 3 words. It's not over. Because revenge doesn't end when the villain falls. It ends when you finally stop needing them to notice. Later that afternoon, a car pulled up the dirt road. I recognized it instantly. Mom's old sedan. Still coughing exhaust like a smoker. I didn't move as she got out, clutching her purse like a shield. She looked smaller than I remembered. The kind of small that comes from carrying guilt instead of groceries. Her voice wavered. Clara, you look like your father today. I didn't answer. I let her walk closer. I didn't know. She whispered. Not all of it. She said your father wanted... Mom. I interrupted. Please. Don't say his name like it excuses her. Tears welled in her eyes. She's still your sister. Was... I corrected. And being related doesn't mean I have to keep bleeding for her. Mom's shoulders sagged. She's lost everything. The firm let her go. Reporters are at her door. She's not eating. That's her consequence. I said quietly. Not my burden. We stood in the silence, broken only by the creek, murmuring behind us. Finally, she said, he would have wanted peace. He would have wanted truth. I replied. Mom nodded. And for the first time, I saw understanding instead of denial in her eyes. She reached out and placed an envelope in my hand. She asked me to give you this. Said you wouldn't see her otherwise. I didn't open it until after she left. The handwriting on the front Marianne's perfect loops made my stomach twist. Inside was a single letter. Clara. I don't know if apologies mean anything anymore. Maybe not. You were right about everything. The trust. The will. The art. I told myself I was protecting Dad's dream. But the truth is, I was jealous. You were part of it and I wasn't. Every time he looked at you, I felt invisible. I built a whole life trying to feel chosen. Now I've lost the only person who ever truly was. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope you paint again. Because you were always the real artist. Marianne. I folded it carefully. Not out of affection, but out of finality. There was nothing left to say. That night, I sat by the fireplace and painted for the first time in years. Not landscapes. Not mountains. I painted two sisters standing back to back. One holding a torch. The other reaching toward the light she'd never earned. When I finished, I titled it Inheritance. Weeks passed. The investigation ended as predictably as I'd known it would. The foundation was dissolved, and Marianne faced charges for fraud and document falsification. She pleaded guilty, earning a suspended sentence and community service. Publicly, she disappeared. Privately, I heard she moved to a small town in Maine under a different name. I didn't hate her anymore. I just stopped remembering her as my mirror. Elliot came to visit that spring. He stood at the cottage door with 2 coffees and that crooked half-smile that always disarmed me. You look peaceful, he said. Strange. Isn't it? I said. Peace used to scare me. He laughed softly. And now it feels like revenge finally learned how to exhale. He walked inside, glancing around at the canvases lined against the walls. You've been busy. I've been alive. I corrected. We sat together on the porch as the sun melted into the horizon. For the first time, I realized my story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about reclamation, the art of taking back what's yours without losing the softness that made you human in the first place. Elliot leaned back, watching the colors shift. You ever think about showing your work again? I smiled faintly. Maybe, but not in galleries. I want to open something smaller. A workshop. For girls who've been told they're too emotional, too naive, too fragile to hold power. Because I used to be all 3, and I was still dangerous enough to rebuild. He raised his cup in a silent toast. To rebuilding, to remembering who we were before they told us otherwise. I added, months later, I did open that workshop. I called it the Sleeping Giant Studio. The sign still makes me laugh. It feels like an inside joke between me and Dad. One, the world will never quite understand. On opening day, people from the nearby towns came, teenagers with sketchbooks, mothers holding their daughters' hands, even old men who said they hadn't picked up a brush in decades. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud. But it was real. As I walked through the room, I saw a young girl, maybe 14, hesitating in front of a blank canvas. She reminded me of myself before everything broke. He crouched beside her. What's wrong? I asked. She frowned. I don't know what to paint. Then start with what hurts. I said, that's where beauty usually hides. She looked up at me and smiled a small, brave smile. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Revenge had turned into redemption. Sometimes I still get letters from people who saw that viral video of the gala the night everything came crashing down. They tell me they cried, that they left toxic families, that they finally picked up something they'd abandoned years ago. And every time I read one, I feel less like a victim and more like a survivor who turned her wounds into windows. If you've been watching this story and carrying your own version of betrayal, I want you to remember this. You don't owe forgiveness to those who built their peace on your silence. But you owe yourself freedom, the kind that comes from choosing to stop bleeding for people who never tried to heal you. And when you finally do, the world will look different. Quieter. softer, honest. If this story touched something inside you, please like, share, and subscribe. Not just for me, but for anyone who's ever needed proof that the truth always finds its way home. Leave a comment telling me what you've learned about letting go. And maybe, together, we'll remind others that survival can still sound like art.